Oh, what another wonderful day to be here with you all in Achten Tan's great library. Forgive me if I sound a little different today. I was out on a pleasant jaunt with my friends Ganth and Bone, and I seem to have come back with a slight malady. Oh dear, I hope I didn't get that from... No, it's fine. Anyway, those of you who have come from other dimensions, and yes, I know for certain now, I know you've been wandering in when I'm not looking, or perhaps I could look all I like and never know I was staring right at you, but at any rate, you are welcome to spend as much time here as you like, but I really must insist that you stay in the places made public and open to Achten Tan residents, and stay out of the library's more private places. Those are off limits not only to those who reside in Achten Tan, but to all who come here, no matter how far they may have come from. There are things, oh yes, there are things, and you who listen to my words from some strange and distant reality would do well to remember that, lest you find that the wall between our worlds will not be enough to save you. Anyway, here we all are again, having such a nice time. Aren't we all having such a nice time getting along together and following the rules? Oh yes, just wonderful, just wonderful. We're joined today by another spectacular tale teller to weave for us a personal and moving narrative of a time I'm sure we all remember, a deeply and strangely affecting time during that most bizarre of years when everything seemed to go wrong at once. I miss it. Here for your listening pleasure, Kyle Beers presents The Wind in the Leaves.
I remember the day when the Ardyun first came to Achten Tan. In the beginning of the autumn, after a meager harvest, a strange disease swept across the town. The horror of watching my own sister fall into an eternal slumber was overwhelming, and, with all the other disasters that soon struck the town, I mused about ending my pain with my old broken axe. What was unusual about the deep sleep was that the bodies seemed to have no need of food or drink. They seemed to maintain themselves. I only know of this because while the rest of the victims were dragged to the village's house of medicine, I hid my sister Zan away from my neighbors who, like me, lived near the center of town. I knew it was stupid and risky, seeing how we assumed anyone could suddenly fall into eternal sleep. Zan was all I had left in this world, and I still feel justified in my choice. It was one brisk fall day when the Ardyun were first spotted en route to Achten Tan. They were a most unusual bunch, heavy robes draping nondescript ancient bodies, covered with a dried bone meal paste. Amidst the ever-growing tension with the elves of Satama, we feared that they had launched a crusade. As they first approached town, they lowered their hoods. They looked like strange mummies to me when I first saw them, a startling sight indeed. The Ardyun spoke with a sing-songy cadence in a language that was unknown. Gar Tsa, Rayasar, Ralheer, Risau. They repeated in rounds with other phrases I found hard to make out. The people gathered in the nearest open space of the medical center where the strangers stopped. The crowds talked among themselves, sounding like wind through tall grass from a distance. "What news do you have of a fellow among you, Rapaccio Palor?" spoke the robed Ardyun who stood tall, almost as if they were a descendant of the giants of old. "We thought he would have told you, O citizens of Achten Tan, of our coming." Rapaccio, of course, was an old explorer. He was strong for his many years, and many in town looked up to his wisdom. Then, one day, he stole a compass and vanished. "We come with glad tidings," another one of the robed strangers called out to us. "For the God Tree awakens." I was the first to speak my mind. "We have no glad tidings here. We have experienced an earthquake, and a segment of our population has fallen into an unbreakable slumber." "But those are glad tidings," one of the robed ones joyfully declared. "Your sleeping, O awake ones, are the seedlings of the God Tree." The tall one raised their hands high to the sky, turning to the giant tree. Achten Tan and its towering ribs sat in its shadow. As the Ardyun turned and faced the tree in prayer, I could hear the wind cry and moan. I felt like an enthralled, punished child, angry at their parents, yet devoted and loving towards them. The hairs on my arms stood on end. "I think," said the town's doctor, "that the people who indulged in the god tree gumbo Saphira had cooked up are the only ones who had been affected by the sleeping plague." The tall Ardyun grimaced in anger at the term used to describe what they called a blessing. Plague. It made the process sound like a doom, a pox upon the town. As the talks continued near the medical center, two conclusions were reached. The first, and perhaps grimmest we faced, was that there was no waking the sleeping people. A process had begun to change them into the proper vessels for the god tree. Survival or not, they had a fate to fulfill. Though we had our endless questions, we grimly accepted that fact. I turned from the crowds and hid my sorrow. No one knew Zan fell into slumber, that I hid my afflicted sister. It would have been what Saphira wanted. Zan loved Saphira passionately. I would have loved to have had Saphira as a sister-in-law. The second decision was that the Ardyun would live among us. Not only that, but we would help them build their temple of birth and rebirth. This temple would be dedicated to worshiping the god tree, our village's eternal guardian. This led all of us, including myself, to welcome the newcomers with open arms. The temple had a second purpose as well, to prepare the seedlings for their final goal, as well as train us for our ultimate purpose to repay the god tree. As I and the rest of the villagers went our ways to begin our mornings, I kept a low profile, making sure no one followed me back to my home. I watched over my shoulder as crossroad after crossroad darted past my vision. I pushed through my front door and unlocked the bedroom in haste to see my sister Zan. I knelt at the foot of the bed, prostrating my body across my sister's legs. "I've kept you hidden," I wept, lips trembling. I sorrowfully walked around to the side of the bed where I kept a pot of water to place wet cloths on her forehead. "They say you have been chosen to be a seedling to propagate the god tree species. The Ardyun instructed us to feed the sleeping ones a bone meal paste, closer to a broth or a thin gruel. That is what the seedlings being brought to the temple would be fed. The bone meal paste would alleviate the stomach pressure and swelling the seeding process would cause. It was expected that all sleepers would be brought there, but the thought of leaving my sister with a group that I barely even knew was too much for me. It was too much already to think of leaving her behind with the town's medicinal practitioners. To my surprise, my sister seemed to eat the gruel I fed her as if she were in a feverish state of delirium. I watched her carefully as the paste slowly disappeared from the bowl I made it in, leaving behind dust and paths made by my spoon as I scooped it up. In that moment, Zan changed. "Please," I begged through sobs and protestations to the god tree. "Please don't take my sister away." I rested my head on the bed next to her shoulder, nuzzling closer to the crook of her neck like a young child to a parent. "Zan's all I have left." I looked out the window towards the god tree. The wind howled and slammed the rickety shutters on the windows. I lifted my head to notice that hours had passed, and the moon had taken its course in the heavens among the stars. I looked out the window. The stars looked different to me. A voice called my name in the wind, beckoning me across the chasms that formed from the most recent earthquake, and down the acid trails to the foot of the god tree. As I approached, the voice became more and more obvious. It was Zan. "Zan!" I screamed as loud as I could, but it felt like the wind itself stole the words from my very throat. In anger, I turned to look at the nearby root to see a shiny, recently forged axe. Deliriously, I took hold of the axe and caressed the haft, taking aim at the tree itself. As I held the axe high above my head, the polished metal twinkling like the full moon, I noticed movement above. Craning my head upwards, I saw a sickly branch reach down. With a violent lunge, the branch grabbed the axe and wrested it from my grasp. My head bolted up from where I had last rested it. The wind, Zan's voice, the god tree wrestling the axe from me. All a dream. All a terrible dream. Sitting cross-legged upon the floor, I ruminated over the imagined events. In horror, I remembered the last moments in keen detail. The god tree wanted my anger. The god tree wanted me to feed it. I hid in my house for days, holding fast the shutters to block out all vision of the god tree. Even with the shut windows, I could feel the shadow looming, watching. I swore I could hear the wind calling to me, each breeze beckoning me with invisible hands. I only emerged to eat, and what I ate was the bone meal paste I fed Zan. As I ate, I felt myself slowly lose myself to anger. I was mad at the tree and the Ardiun for taking my sister, even if she was still hidden for now. I was angry at myself for letting things get this bad. And then the day of the temple's completion came. The wind ripped through the house, tearing the shutters off, leaving me with the dismal vista of the god tree. There laid Zan in all her horrific beauty, slowly becoming the seedling of the god tree, all in view of my front door. I no longer cared. The people have emphatically embraced the Ardiun faith. The people eagerly sung the praisings of the teachings. Even I, admittedly, have become one of the Ardiun. However, I am a reluctant member, as the very thought makes me uncomfortable. My worries and concerns grew to a peak when the wind whipped down the pathways and across the acidic chasms ripped open by the earthquakes. As I looked out over the square and the chasms, I saw people quaking in holy fear and holy need. There they stood, dropping everything that they were doing, some people even falling to their knees as if they were trying to placate a vengeful god. The way they all watched the tree, I could swear for a moment that the god tree was speaking. The branches shook and trembled as if they were coming to life and longed to stretch. All of us who lived in the shadow of the god tree could hear voices from the hot as the leaves rustled about. I could see the distant villagers coming closer. And then my sister spoke, the first time I heard her voice since her slumber began. At first, I could not make out what she began saying. Her voice sounded like rustling leaves, blown about in the crisp winds of an autumn storm. The woman that lay in that bed, I feared, was no longer my sister. Whatever it was had taken Zan's form. I lost my sister that day, in more ways than one. Then she continued. Arl, Iesiers, Uyir, Israel, Ikor, we sir, near is near Sirkis. I ran outside into the whipping zephyr and ran about a mile before the god tree. There the voice was deafening to me. The wind in the leaves cried, Geir Tsa, Rayasar Rael Irisau. Everything was the Ardiun's hymn to my ears. And then it dawned on me. They sang about how we had a fate tied to the seedlings, a debt to pay to the god tree. What else does a tree need besides sunlight and water? I theorized. but nutrients in the soil. The god tree's seeds needed fertilizer, and the seedlings would grow from our rotting flesh, our sacrificial mound. Where the tree could not grasp me with devotion, like with the rest of Achten Tan, it ensnared me with vehement vitriol. In my anger, I realized what the dream was telling me to do with my old axe. In a dismal sense, I had always known. I had to get her away from the tree that was feeding on her, feeding on me. I knew only that if we stayed any longer, that we would both be lost to the god tree that was once our protector. I'd never cut down a sapling before, but if it meant protecting my sister from a terrible fate, then it had to be done. I sang a short and sad yeln under my very breath as I walked home in grim determination. I entered the main room and spied my axe by the hearth. I closed my eyes to avoid looking at its form. It was the axe of my nightmare. My horrors were transmuting themselves into reality. The same force that made Zan sleep was now leading me to murder. Whether or not I would lose myself was no longer my concern, as long as Zan was free. I fondled the haft of the axe, worn by the long ages since our parents first crafted it. Slowly, I stepped into the bedroom, looking over at Zan. The anger subsided, and I collapsed to my knees. Dropping the axe to my side, with the last of my strength, I kicked the axe out of the bedroom and slammed the door. For the next 2 days, I locked myself into the bedroom, unwilling to leave, lest I look at that horrid axe. Through the crack at the bottom of the door, I would sometimes peek, at its head all a twinkle. I would then pull myself back. I even threatened myself that I would rend my eyes from my skull if I would look at it again. It was a promise that, while I was unwilling to keep it, stopped the glances. She has muttered the most horrid of things to me, things that have driven me mad. I knew I had to cut the growing sapling, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I decided the only thing I could do is steal her away in the dead of night and grow our own god tree, with me as its fertilizer. Many nights now, I've listened to the wind creak through my shutters and sung with my sister in the god tree's language. It is in the same language the Ardeans sung when entering Achten Tan. We sang the songs of my nightmares, the sound of wind in the leaves. Gar, Tsa, Rayasar, Ralheir, I Rasau.
Thank you very much to Kyle Beers for coming and reading The Wind in the Leaves, and also for saving me the job of having to read out a bio by kindly giving us his own. So here's Kyle on Kyle.
Hello, I'm Kyle Beers. I have always enjoyed fantasy and imaginary worlds. When I was a kid, I would go explore in the woods behind my parents' house and pretend I was in Hyrule, or the Pokemon world, or the like. This, and my love for exploration, naturally led me to Dungeons & Dragons, from which I learned to be a dungeon master, crafting my own adventures and worlds. It was a hop, skip, and a jump into writing from this point. I wouldn't have gotten my first short story, The Fate of Elias, published in The Rise of the Fallen, if it wasn't for my friend A.R. Simmons. So, I hope no one minds if I plug her novel, Untimely Love, here to return the favor. I love pulpy and more psychological creators like Lovecraft and, of course, David Lynch. I think this is because I have dealt with depression and anxiety since I was 16. Going through some dark stuff opened me up to writing weird fiction, blending the lines of the macabre and the mundane, and slaying the overused trope of the special chosen boy. Currently, I am reading my way through Frank Herbert's Dune, if anybody wanted to know. You can find me at kdbeersauthor.wordpress.com and on Twitter at kdbauthor, where I post about my expanded Achten Tan brainchild Beyond the Everfall, which I promise I will publish someday.
Thank you again for coming, and we here at the Great Library hope you enjoyed your stay. Sounds from the Year Between is a production of Skullgate Media, the new independent writers collective come indie publisher with big dreams of wonderful things. The podcast is produced by Dee Gagliardi and Chris Durston with help from Chris Van Dyke. This episode was hosted and edited by Chris Durston, and any piano music you might have heard in the background of the episode was improvised by Chris Durston for fun. Sounds from the Year Between is the podcast companion to Tales from the Year Between, our biannual anthology series where each volume is set in a new, collectively created world. Go to skullgatemedia.com or yearbetween.com to learn more and buy our books, because they're good. They're really good. Or follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and Instagram as Skullgate Media. Today's story was The Wind in the Leaves, and that story appears in Achten Tan, Land of Dust and Bone, Volume 1 of Tales from the Year Between. Take care, stay safe, and only cut trees down if they're trying to kill you.
Gee willikers, that was a spooky story. So, if anyone's feeling creeped out, here are a couple bloopers of me reading from this story. And also laugh how I said cuppers instead of couple. It was a long read. The bone meal paste would alleviate the stomach pressure and... Son of a bitch. The bone meal paste would alleviate the stomach pressure and swelling the seeding process would cause. It was expected that all sleepers would be brought there, but the thought of leaving my sister with a group that I had barely even knew was... Seriously? You had to fall. The seventh time I've read this chapter. Paragraph, or whatever this group of words it says. I've read this so many times, I don't even know what you call a group of words. What is this, a sentence?